So I wanted to respond to Conference Report's video on the evolution of consciousness, because he didn't really talk about it in a very flattering light. And, to be fair, he was talking about mostly Andrew Cohen and this idea of evolutionary spirituality that seems to be very self-serving for those who get involved, because they get to think that they're evolving consciously and everybody else is still asleep. I would want to distance myself from that idea and from spiral dynamics as well, because it seems more like a methodology developed for corporate management than a deep philosophical inquiry into the nature of this process of the evolution of consciousness. If I were going to point you in the direction of someone who wrote about the evolution of consciousness worth studying, it would be Gebser in this book, The Ever-Present Origin, where he, based on archaeological evidence and artifactual evidence, tries to recreate the phenomenological experience of human history and the deep past of our species. And he discovers through this phenomenological work that there have been mutations in consciousness through various structures, and that these structures are, as they mutate, they are a change in the way space and time are experienced. So, each structure, which Gebser calls the archaic, the first magic, the second mythic, mental, and integral. Each of these structures involves a different experiential grounding in space and time. The archaic is spaceless and timeless. It's this sense of complete embeddedness and oneness. Magic consciousness is one-dimensional, aware of a sense of point-like space, but it hasn't yet fully become our conception of space. The mythic consciousness is a temporal, cyclically temporal consciousness, but remains mostly spaceless. The mental structure, for the first time, realizes space through the mastery of perspective, and the integral consciousness realizes what had remained hidden for the mental, that being time. The integral realizes time as an intensity rather than a falsely spatialized quantity as it had been for the mental structure of consciousness. But now for Gebser, these mutations take place on a socio-historical level. They're not something that individuals accomplish on their own, through their own volition. We can't will ourselves into the next mutation. Mutations happen to us. We don't force them to occur. And so this idea of evolving consciously, that Andrew Cohen's trying to talk about, there's no real philosophical basis for saying something like that. But once we recognize that, if we do follow Gebser in recognizing that a mutation into the integral structure of consciousness is imminent, then certainly we can prepare for this. We can do our best to seek out the evidence and the procedure that gives us experience of this new structure of consciousness, because we do have some sort of a measuring stick, I think, that being our own sense of wholeness and well-being, because there's a great deal of anxiety right now because the pictures of the world that we have held are falling to pieces, the traditional pictures, and we don't really have a new story yet. We're in between stories. And so, until consciousness is able to reorient itself in space and time, as the result of a mutation, we seem to be stuck in a deficient mode of relationship to the universe and to each other. But if there is going to be a change, it's going to require a participatory, intersubjective process and procedure, not individual enlightenment as a sort of rising above the common lot. I think is somewhat an inappropriate understanding, a wrong understanding. Really, there is only relationship, and through relationship, there's born something which transcends any individual. And whatever enlightenment is, it's a knowing with. It's a consciousness true to its own etymological meaning, a knowing with, a knowing together, not simply a self-possessed enlightenment. Because light shines and needs to be reflected to see itself. So, enlightenment is a dialogue. It's something that we do together. So in closing here, I want to read a few paragraphs from a chapter of John Gebser's Ever-Present Origin. This is from the chapter called The Eruption of Time on page 288. I have no time. This millionfold remark by man today is symptomatic. Time, even in this still negative form, is his overriding preoccupation. But when speaking of time, man today still thinks of clock time. How shocked he would be if he were to realize that he is also saying, I have no soul, and I have no life. For perspectival man, time did not yet pose a problem. Only man today, who is now awakening or mutating toward the aperspectival consciousness, takes note of every hour of his apparent lack of time that drives him to the brink of despair. When he speaks of perspectival and aperspectival, perspectival, he's speaking of the mental structure of consciousness, and aperspectival is the integral. And he's saying that when we admit that I have no time, we're basically saying we have no soul, because time, first realized in the mythic structure of consciousness, was also when the soul was recognized, when the psyche first came into human awareness, that there was this inner imaginary or imaginatory realm of archetypes and of symbols and so forth. That's what constitutes the soul, and it's basically temporicity that gives us that experience. And so saying I have no time is equivalent to canceling your experience of soul life. So to continue. Man today also lacks a secure base. Magic man was sheltered in mystery, as we today in sleep are still immersed in the nocturnal depths of the world. Like us in deep sleep, he was most profoundly sheltered. Mythical man was still secure, but his security, pervaded by the terrors as well as the bliss of dreams, held him suspended within the polar sway of events. And mental man, at least in his waking state, had already emerged from the shelter of the magic and the enclosure of the mythical worlds. His growing ego consciousness freed him to great extent from the earlier forms of being, and his previously sheltered existence gave way to his own efforts to gain security. He achieved this security by means of his new faculty of directing thought, which enabled him to create world systems and to grasp realities that gave him stability in one respect, in the form of philosophemes, and in another in the scientific understanding of matter. Whereas magic sheltering was still a genuine shelter, and the mythical, because it was already in motion, provided henceforth only enclosure, the security of the mental structure was, in accordance with its nature, purely fictive, that is, a design and projection of security by the ego onto the external world. The fiction of this security became obvious when the mental structure became deficient and degenerated into mere rationality. Ever since the inadequacies of the rational came to light, man has suffered fears of exposure, abandonment, and being thrown. He believes that he is standing at the brink, faced with the nothingness of the abyss, where the most courageous assume their compulsory pose of grim heroism. He puts Jean-Paul Sartre in parentheses, or attempts to escape it by a retreat into myth, as of late Martin Heidegger puts in quotes. The eruption of time must seem to everyone still convinced of the exclusive validity of the rational as the ultimate destroyer of the systems and conceptions that were deemed secure and afforded a sense of security. But the eruption of time is destructive only if we fail to realize what time actually is. If we are able to realize this, the eruption is not a further and ultimate loss of shelter and security, but rather a liberation. There is yet another implication of this "I have no time," the admission and declaration of impotence by European American man. That being, someone who has no time also has no space. He is either at an end or he is free. He is at an end if he does not realize the implications of having no time, that is, that space has absorbed time, or that everything has become rigid and lifeless. Or if he does not realize that time, when employed as a mere divider, dissolves space. But if he realizes that time denotes and includes all previous time forms, he is free. Only the recognition of all temporal forms which co-constitute man can dissociate him from the exclusive validity of the mental time form, establish a certain detachment, and enable him to integrate them. The courage to accept, along with the mental time concept, the efficacy of the pre-rational magic timelessness and irrational mythic temporicity makes possible the leap into irrational time freedom. This is not a freedom from previous time forms, since they are co-constituents of every one of us. It is, to begin with, a freedom for all time forms. Only this form of freedom, which proceeds from the concretion and integration of all time forms, and which can be achieved only by a consciousness which is free to stand above the previous time forms, can bring about a conscious advance or approximation to origin. It is from origin, which is not bound to time, that all time forms constituting us have mutated. Origin lies before all timelessness, temporicity, and time. Wherever man becomes conscious of the pre-given, pre-conscious, originary, pre-timelessness, he is in time freedom, consciously recovering its presence. Where this is accomplished, origin and the present are integrated by the intensified consciousness. The eruption of time into our consciousness is the first indication, the initial motif of the consciousness mutation that is today acute. This mutation will bear its fruits of transforming the world if we succeed in superseding the eruption of time. But that is tantamount to what we have called the presentiation of origin, which can be achieved only by the successful fulfillment of the main task posed by the new mutation, the coming to consciousness of time freedom, or the achronon. So, yeah, I'll just let that sit with you.